Hello there. I'm just going to talk a little bit about how LDC Via works behind the scenes. So as a developer that you can actually start using LDC Via to create your own applications and use our own API to access and work with all of the data that you've migrated across to LDC Via. So in our other video, we talked about how you would migrate a database using the migrator tool, how you'd use the viewer to control all of the configuration of your data and so on inside LDC Via. That's all well and good, and think of it in terms of an administration console, somewhere that you would spend your time if you're looking after the administration of the data that's inside LDC Via. As a developer, you're also going to be wanting to look at creating applications and accessing the data to use maybe in other applications. So I'm going to talk about two things really today. One is the LDC Via API, and the other is the various templates that we've made public for you to use as starting points for your own applications. So the LDC Via API is documented here at api.ldcvia.com and contains details of every single API request that you're able to make to LDC Via. Everything that you see inside the administration application is written using this API. We don't use any hidden behind the scenes things. It's all done with the publicly available API calls. The first thing that you're going to want to do with any request at all is authenticate. When you are in LDC Via, you're authenticated, and every user has an API key stored on their profile, and you use this to authenticate yourself when you're making an API request. So every single API request has to have an API key HTTP header added to the request. So if we were looking at a jQuery example, then you would make your AJAX request and you would add the headers parameter where you pass the API key parameter with the actual API key from your own profile. That's a complete secret that no one else knows, and it uniquely identifies you as the person that's making that request. If you want to implement something where the end user doesn't obviously know their API key, but they have an account, then there is actually a login API method that allows you to post a username and password, and it will return to you the API key for that user. That's actually the only API request that we offer that doesn't require the API key HTTP header to be sent as a parameter on that request. So once you've got past that authentication phase, there's then a whole bunch of operations. First of all, you're going to want to look at maybe the databases that are available to you. So you can get all of the databases that the authenticated user is able to get by calling this URL, and that will return back to you an array of databases with the title of each database and the name of each database. So, and you can imagine that basically we're going to be drilling down. So once you've got a database, you can go and get all of the collections within that database. It will return to you, in this case, a list of all of the collections and a count of documents in each collection. And then again, once you've got a collection, you can go and then get a list of documents within a collection. So fairly logical URL structures here. And then finally, once you've got a collection of documents, you can then go and get a specific document by calling the document API, passing in the database name, the collection name, and the universal ID of the document, and you get sent back a JSON object that represents the document as we have it in our database. There's then also sort of various additions to that. So those are the sort of the main functions that you'd work with, but then you've also got things like file attachments, which adds another level of granularity where you've got file attachments stored on documents. You've got things like user detail, so you can go off and get a list of other people within your organization. You can go and get other users' details, so you can go and find the details about another user. You can go and get details about databases, so as a super user you're able to add users to databases, remove them from databases, add them to groups, and so on, to control the access control of down at the document level of databases as you need to. There's some standard utility functions. where you can do things like the equivalent of a DB column, so a list of values in a collection field name. Get a list of responses to a document. Export a document to PDF, export a collection of documents to Excel, and pass out all of the doc links within a rich text field in a document. You can also go and examine audit trail logs, so you can go and search logs for a single database, a collection, or a document, and all of those cases you can actually specify timeframes and all sorts of other things to search against. And then the other thing that I didn't talk about was metadata. So metadata we use to describe a collection. So each collection has a list of field names that are stored in the collection, and against a field name we store the type of data that's stored, whether it's number, string, date, readers, authors, and so on. Then we also store whether the field is considered a key field, a field label for the field, and also a sort order, so a priority order that field should have in relation to all of the other fields in the collection. So using all of these things, what we're able to do is start building the application templates. So if we go and look at our team room template as an example, what we're using here is an AngularJS front end that goes and gets data from LDC Via. So we pass in the host name that we're getting data from and the database name that we're getting data from, and then based upon that it understands the structure of how that database works, and so it can go and say, I want to go and get all of the main topic documents from that database, and I'm going to go and display these particular fields to the end user. And if we go and add a new test document, we can say it's a discussion and has some rich text in it, and we'll save that, and this has immediately appeared. So if we go back to our main topic here, you can say this is the document that we just created using the API there. So this is all just completely standard AngularJS along with Bootstrap, and then on top of that, what we've done is partnered closely with Team Studio, who have developed two frameworks. One is called Boot Cards, which is a theme basically to sit on top of Bootstrap for the UI. So that gives us this layout of documents and views of documents that works very well in the Domino context. And then the other element is the X Components framework, which is the AngularJS set of instructions for creating the layout of this application. So all of our application templates are actually open source. So if we go and look at the team room as an example, what we have basically is a relatively simple AngularJS application that we're able to modify simply by changing a few JavaScript files and then also creating HTML files. So the way that you create this basic application is that we have a main JavaScript file called teamroom.js in this case, and we have to define a few things. First is we want to define the layout of the menu options. So when we look at our team room, we've got by date, by category, by author, and by milestone as our main menu options, and they appear here basically. So we have by date, by category, by author, and by milestone event. And all they've defined is that when you click on one of those, we go and open a URL, home, category, author, and milestone. Fairly simple stuff. So if I just scroll down this file here, what we've created is some simple routing so that when we click on home, we're taken to home HTML. When we click on category, we're taken to category HTML, and so on. So a fairly simple mapping of URL structures to HTML files that will get loaded when the user clicks on one of those. If we go and look at the structure of each of those HTML files, home.html uses the X components markup to use the predefined structures of X components to lay out our application for us. So we have our header bar, reads all of that configuration JavaScript to create the menu for us. Layout creates the basic application layout. And then the most important stuff really is this list and form structure that we have within the rest of the application. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we have a list of documents, and on the right-hand side, we have the main document form. So when we're displaying a list, we have to give some fairly basic configuration. We tell it what model of document structures to use, a title to display, where to go and get the data from. So that's going to be going to the LDC Via API to go and get data. The URL to use to go and get individual documents, and the URL to use to go and get response documents if there are any. The rest of this is really then just configuration to say how wide we want the left-hand view display to be, whether we allow the user to add documents, how we want to sort the data, which fields we want to display in the list, and then whether we want to enable things like infinite scrolling and so on like that. Within that list then, we're going to display a form, and again this is fairly simple from a configuration point of view. We just say which model we're going to use, so in this case it's main topic, the URL that's going to go and load the document to display the data, and again the URL to go and get response data. And because we want to display response documents as well, we have an embedded list within the list, so we've got nested lists here, and this will go off and get response documents using this URL. It's going to use the model name called response, and again we've got all this options to say whether we want to allow the user to add responses, whether we allow searching, and all of these different configuration options that we want to enable for the end user. So based on that, if we go and look at the all documents view, you can see that we've got our header bar, we've got our left-hand side configuration here, we've got our add button. If I go down here, we've got the responses section. I can click add here and we'll add a response. We'll save that, and that immediately appears here. So all of that layout here is driven by that single HTML file configuration. The other element that I didn't talk about so far is the models themselves. So based on the structure of the database, we have models that define the main topic, response, and mission document types within the application. So the main topic has a subject, from, so they're created by, document type, category, and so on. And each of these is different field types. So subject is a text field, document type is a select list that goes and gets its source options from a URL. We've got milestone that again is a select list that goes and gets its data from a different place. Due date is a date type field, and all of these different options are just simple configuration. So when we go and add a new field, you can see that these map on to the different options that we've configured within that model. So if we want to change what appears here, we simply go and modify that JavaScript configuration. Likewise with responses, it's a bit simpler, but again it's very similar. We have subject, created by, date created, and so on, that defines the structure of the fields. And mission is more of a configuration type document. So when we go into our settings for the application, we're able to control things like the list of categories, the list of document types. So if I was to add a new document type here and save this and reload the page, we'd get a new document type here called demo type. So it's a way of configuring the application without having to go into any other places to go and do that administration task. So the point of all of this is that using AngularJS and these simple configuration files, it's very quick to create a basic application that you might want to, that's similar in style to a sort of a standard notes style view document interface. If you want to do something that's more complex, then you can simply use the API. So as an example, our generic template again uses boot cards for its layout structure. So let's just go and see this. So we're using the standard boot cards look and feel, and it feels very similar to the team room template that we were looking at before. But in this case, this is a pure jQuery application. There's a JavaScript file that allows us to configure how the application is going to work. It builds all of the HTML that is requested, that requests the data, that goes and displays the data to the end user. And there are no HTML files in this case. This is just building the application on the fly as the user requests it. But we're relying on the LDC Via server to do all of the configuration of who's able to read what content and the management of the security side of things for us. So this is very much a simple jQuery application that manages data for us. But you can see, for example, where we're going off and getting the details about the database that we're loading. We can go and get the details of an individual document. When a user clicks on a document, it will go and get loaded and get displayed to the user, and so on. So all of this configuration stuff is using our standard LDC Via API to go and access all of this data and display nice functional applications to an end user, and can do pretty much anything that you can imagine.